Good morning, Хороший день. I'm Roger Hilton, research fellow at GLOBSEC, coming to you from Vienna, Austria, and welcome to the inaugural first episode of Global Tremors, GLOBSEC's new breaking news format. Big news deserves big answers. So for everybody watching right now, thank you so much for joining us, and we look forward to working for your confidence. Yesterday's decree by President Putin recognizing the breakaway republics of Donetsk and Luhansk has dramatically escalated the already tense relations between Kyiv and Moscow. In a nutshell, the move has represented a blatant attack on Ukrainian sovereignty and the rules-based international order, and has immediately altered the current European security architecture, forcing the European Union and NATO to react. To help us get a better sense of the situation on the ground, it is my great pleasure to welcome Lesia Vasylenko, an MP from the Holos Party, a liberal and pro-European opposition party, coming to us live from Kyiv. Ms. Vasylenko, welcome to Global Tremors.
Hello, it's a pleasure.
Ms. Vasylenko and I will do a first round of questions and open up the floor to the audience. For everybody watching, there's two ways to leave questions. You'll be seeing the Slido app, so you can either click on the hashtag or use the barcode and drop questions in, or you can leave comments in the comment sections and we'll get to it a little bit later. So, Ms. Vasylenko, let's get back into it right away. I don't even know where to start. I'm not sure what we watched yesterday, if it was an alternative history lesson. But from your perspective, watching the press conference yesterday with President Putin, what was your immediate reaction to the news, and did any of it come to a surprise as you?
Oh, sorry, I was muted there just for a second. But yeah, going back to your question, it was a really tough show to watch yesterday. And I mean, I felt sorry for all the media, journalists, all the politicians out there who had to do this as part of the job, myself included. Watching that 1 hour absolutely made up history lesson of facts that never happened other than inside of Putin's head, that was difficult, that was insane. It felt like a kind of fantasy world of a mad leader come alive, and it just felt surreal, really.
Again, Ms. Vasylenko, yeah, I mean, obviously it was sort of the most bizarre history lesson, referencing back Lenin and Stalin, sort of going through on the decommunism, about really going through with it, given what Ukraine had already did. I'm not sure President Putin would ever be casted as a Bond villain, but that's basically where it were. Right now, you're a member of the parliament. You know, what is the situation on the ground, and what do you believe is the next move for the Ukrainian government, and as well for the people, regarding this sort of this escalatory move made by the Kremlin right now?
Well, Parliament is in session, and that is good. We expect to be voting on a declaration from the Ukrainian Parliament just in under 20 minutes now, condemning the actions of Putin, calling the international community to do the same, to call Putin back to his senses and to respect of international law, and also condemning any recognition by any state of these so-called and self-proclaimed republics, which are essentially parts of sovereign Ukraine. Other than this declaration in Parliament, we are also on the brink of considering a whole set of laws which would strengthen Ukraine's independence and ability to self-defend in the face of Russian aggression. We now need to restructure the budget of Ukraine to increase the defense spending. We now need to also consider introducing martial law in parts of territories of Ukraine, so that we can counter the aggression coming from Russia in a better way. And of course, Parliament as a whole is waiting for the address of the President of Ukraine. And we, as Holos, as an opposition party, together with other opposition parties, we are calling on the ruling party and calling on the President of Ukraine to come in and speak to the people, speak to the Parliament, and also call for an emergency closed session of the Parliament, where a hearing could take place together with the Ministry of Defense and with other members of the cabinet of ministers of Ukraine and the government of Ukraine, essentially, so that we get the information information about what to expect, about the different scenarios, and about how we as politicians, also government representatives, are expected to act in all the different scenarios that we can develop.
Ms. Vasylenko, I would ask if you could just come a little bit closer to your microphone because the sound's cutting out a little bit.
Okay, sure. Let's try it.
Yeah, that's much better. So maybe Ms. Vasylenko, before I move over to the question about the people, if you can just reiterate or repeat sort of what is the modus operandi right now on the legislation floor and like sort of what you think the Ukrainian government should be doing right now.
So at the moment, the parliament is about to adopt a declaration, a resolution condemning the actions of Putin and Russia's recognition of parts of sovereign Ukraine as independent states. We are also calling on all other nations to condemn this action by Russia, and we are calling them not to recognize these sovereign parts, these so-called republics as sovereign states. And again, we are waiting for the president of Ukraine to come and speak to the people, to come and speak to parliament, and to hold a closed session of parliament together with the Ministry of Defense and other government bodies to analyze all the various scenarios that can be taking place and to have a clear-cut plan as to what each government body will be doing in all the different cases that can be developing right now as we speak and in the next few days.
Ms. Vasylenko, it's great to see sort of the unity despite sort of the fracturedness of every parliament moving forward. I've seen a couple of interviews this morning of people walking through the streets in Kyiv. It goes without saying that this is not a new experience for you or for your countrymen and countrywomen. Walking on the streets of Kyiv or anywhere else for people getting breakfast this morning, it seems as if the people are unfazed by this move and they won't be intimidated, by this gesture from the Kremlin. What is your take on the average person walking around? And, what is it stressful? Is it, what is the sense on the ground where you are right now?
This tension has been growing for the last 2 months intensely, much more intensely than over the last 8 years of the war. It is true, absolutely, that the people of Ukraine are used to this kind of escalation of aggression and de-escalation. We had 8 years of war to teach us how to do this. And we were doing the best we could until I guess yesterday, and just a little bit maybe last week as well, when exact dates of the escalation of the invasion were announced, and when yesterday we had absolutely crazy talk during Russia's Security Council and during Putin's speech. And I mean, a very well orchestrated show it was. But what it means for the Ukrainian people, it means more tension, it means more distress, more anxiety. And of course, all of this comes down to a psychological attack on the people of Ukraine, which then has immediate impacts on the way people are spending their money, on the way people are choosing to invest or not invest. And at the end, all of this hits the economy of Ukraine hard. And it's a whole separate form of Russian aggression against Ukraine in the economic dimension.
Ms. Vasylenko, thanks so much for providing sort of the in-person view of what's going on. I think, everybody at GLOBSEC, we know that it's a very resilient people and this will not knock them down. I'm so happy you brought up sort of the economic, financial part of it before we move to our next question. Obviously, the markets have tanked already. Oil is at has already skyrocketed since the markets opened this morning. So I think, like you said, and what President Zelensky mentioned in Ukraine, that the West, North America and Europe will have to look at cheap financing options to help the Ukrainian government stabilize the currency and stay resilient. Ms. Vasylenko, I'm a big fan of your Twitter account, as you know. I've been following it. And I think one of the big stories that was underreported yesterday was we had reactions coming from Kyiv, from Moscow, from Washington, and from Brussels. But something that didn't get any coverage, which you brought attention to, was the Ukrainians living inside Donetsk and Luhansk. So, what do you think they are going through right now, and what advice would you give them, given that they've woken up this morning in, theoretically an entirely different country?
I can't even begin to imagine what the people in the territories which are already occupied by Russia are feeling at the moment. these Ukrainians have been extremely strong throughout the years. They have remained in their homes, they have remained in their land, and they have countered Russian aggression from within. And now, when they have heard this announcement, I guess the thoughts that must be going through their head would be, well, where do they belong now? Will anybody be fighting for them? And what will that fighting result in? I mean, we just spoke about the tensions and the distress here in Kyiv and in other cities of Ukraine. I can only imagine what the people are going through there, because really this announcement of recognizing these territories as sovereign republics, this never happened in 8 years. Nobody really prepared for that. So for the people there, I guess my message would be to stay in unity and to be confident that they are Ukrainians living in Ukrainian territory, and that the world and Ukraine itself are going to be fighting for them, and will not let them remain abandoned as they may be feeling.
Ms. Vasylenko, that's a great answer for everybody to hear, that sort of there's this solidarity and unity, standing in arms with your fellow countrymen and countrywomen. For everybody watching right now, I just want to point out that despite the dramatic escalation in violence and in tensions, the Ukrainian army is not actually taking the bait. They're not vacation, a little bit like with what happened with Georgia in 2008. So, Ms. Vasylenko, before we move to Russia, I mean, I think, again, it's just unbelievable restraint showcased by the Ukrainian army and soldiers saying that, we will fight for you when the time is right and ready to go.
That is true. So there's still not been a command to move in and to give response in fighting, and it's extremely difficult for the Ukrainian soldiers who are stationed all along the Ukrainian-Russian border to not give in to the provocations which are happening all along, and several dozens that during just 24 hours. I mean, for them to just stand by and watch as they are being shot at, and as there are casualties in the Ukrainian army, it's not an easy task. And okay, for sure, let's be like honest here. We're not Russians at the end of the day. So for sure, there are some cases where they just they do shoot back, but it's not sanctioned. It's not something that the soldiers are allowed to do or endorsed to do by their military commanders. And whenever these glitches happen, there's also consequences for the armed forces personnel in question who has not abided by the command.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. And like I referenced it very early on, about in 2008 with South Ossetia and Abkhazia, where sort of the Russian army baited the Georgian military into starting the conflict, quote unquote. So, I mean, I think it's great sort of to see that, the Ukrainian army has learned from this experience. They're not making the same mistake, and that they're continuing to hold down on the position. Everybody who's watching out there, I just want to remind that we're taking questions on Slack section on Facebook for Ms. Vasylenko. So, Ms. Vasylenko, let's move now to Russia. I think the Biden administration with Jake Sullivan and Anthony Blinken, they've been doing a great job of sort of getting ahead of the information landscape and sort of choreographing what might be coming next, which I think has been a big difference between the Biden administration and President Obama. In response, though, Russian state TV and media has been laying the groundwork to its population to prepare the Russian people for an announcement. Let me ask you, do you think the Russian citizens will really buy this propaganda?
I think they have already bought it. I mean, it depends which groups of citizens you're talking about, essentially. I think that most of the Russian population don't even realize what it is when people are talking about LNR, DNR, whatever, that they don't really care. I mean, we're talking about a country extremely vast, with an extremely different population, who have their own batch of problems of a social manner going on, and who also have who are also subject to a very propagandistic media. So for them to hear that something's going on, they may say like, okay, yes, whatever. But I know for certain that whoever we're talking about, be it Russians, Ukrainians, British, Americans, people don't like wars. They don't like to see their family members to die. And should Russia go in full on with an attack and with a war and be sending Russian men to die in Ukraine, there will be questions which will not find answers. What are these men dying for? What are sons, husbands, brothers dying for? Ukrainians will be dying for their land, will be dying to protect their families and their homes and the right of their children to live in an independent country. And that's completely understandable. It's a sacrifice which every family here is ready to make. Russians, they have nothing to sacrifice for apart from a very strange, perverted fantasy of a clearly mad leader.
I couldn't agree with you more, Ms. Vasylenko, and I think it's great where you put this diametric opposite position where, you know, it's very clear and very binary what Ukraine is fighting for, what's on the line, where across the various segments, whether you're in Novosibirsk or Kazan or other cities in Russia, you might be asking yourself, why are we investing resources into this? It goes without saying that President Putin has a long history and has now essentially crushed all public dissent. There's no formal opposition force. Alexei Navalny not just poisoned remains in a Siberian prison colony. And, you know, speaking about the soldiers and sort of the reaction, I mean, the shutdown of the Memorial Foundation of Russian soldiers was also a big, a big move by President Putin. So that begs my next question to you, Ms. Vasylenko, is, you know, let's say things really escalate. Ukraine is in possession now of some very advanced weapons. They're getting extremely intense, very high value intel, where this sort of potential for a guerrilla warfare won't be an easy way out, and it will really prove to be an essentially hard quagmire for Russia. You know, President Putin or the population, do you think they will ever arrive at the point and ask themselves if the juice is worth the squeeze to continue this operation, given sort of the potential sanctions and the body bags that might be coming back to Russia if the conflict actually dramatically escalates?
For Russia, it's a very simple answer and a very simple goal. Putin and all his cronies, they don't want to see Ukraine full stop. They don't want an independent Ukraine. They don't want Ukraine to exist. They don't want Ukrainian people speaking Ukrainian to live on the face of the earth. They see our country as land which must be integrated into the big Russian Empire. And Putin also has made it clear that there is no big Russian Empire without Ukraine in it. So they will be fighting for that. Again, it's a question whether the Russian people want to agree with it. Given all the amount of propaganda circulating in the Russian media, I guess, yes, they also are believers of this big Ruski Mir, Russian world and Russian Empire coming alive again. This is something very strange for people living in a modern society in the 21st century. This is also very strange if we're talking about such things as principles of international law, human rights. But then again, I guess in Russia, they didn't really hear about that.
I mean, thanks for your input on this. For me, it seems as if an insanely difficult balancing act for President Putin, as I mean, to be spending scarce resources on such a, you know, near or broad situation when money and investment should be concentrated on infrastructure and people and on systemic problems affecting Russia seems farcical. And it goes without saying, sort of keeping the oligarchs and his power base satisfied is also a very another difficult task. We've seen some of the potential sanctions about them not being able to, you know, travel bans and freezing of assets. So before we move to the West, I mean, do you think the oligarch class and the Silvaliki are also all on the same page when it comes to this decision?
It seems so at the moment, but then again, up to this point, there were no real sanctions targeting them personally. All the sanctions that were introduced so far are sectoral sanctions. I'm really curious to see the list of sanctions, updated list of sanctions coming from the UK. It should be published today. Maybe it already is, I haven't seen it yet. Also, the US, Biden has promised to publish a list of sanctions as well. But for these sanctions to work, they need to be personal sanctions targeting family members of these oligarchs who are surrounding Putin and who are in the Russian government running that country. And by personal sanctions, I mean cancellation of visas for the wives, for the children, for the relatives and friends. I mean blocking of banking accounts. I mean their expatriation from the countries where they are resident in, cancelling of contracts with schools where private schools where their children are being taught at the moment. And I mean, this is something which would have an impact, and this is something which would influence them personally, because all of these sectoral sanctions, the way that they are imposed in the corporate lawyer business, it's very easy to find ways around them.
Thanks again for this input, Ms. Vasylenko. It goes without saying that, leading up to this, since 2014, Russia has made huge strides in sort of disconnecting its economy from the outside world. They've accumulated a massive amount of current reserves, where I think only 12% of it, according to a New York Times article, is made of US dollars, where they're doing it now in gold, and is also with Chinese renminbi. My question for you is, with this financial cushion, how long do you think it will be able to last in terms of propping up the ruble and sort of financing government functions as sanctions potentially escalate, given if things get worse on it? Because there's no agreement on how long this cushion or this sort of barrier for Putin on the financial side will last for his country.
Look, they have really a vast financial cushion. I don't want to go into the numbers, as I'm afraid I'll be making a mistake and disinforming people who are watching this now. But really, it can last them for decades. Plus, it's a country rich in natural resources, and they can sustain themselves. This is clear. But this does not give this country the right or the authority to declare themselves more sovereign than other countries. And essentially, what we are watching as the whole global community is the reforming and restructuring of the world order as we know it. Russia has already been allowed to go ahead with their aggressive plans in 2008, when parts of Georgia were similarly annexed and occupied by the Russians. The history has repeated itself in 2014. And again, now we're in 2022, and again, we see a repetition of that. And again, we're all just stand by us watching as Putin is playing the terrible child and going in without even having to declare war, essentially. And the question is, if this is allowed to go on, then what is the value and what is the point of having the Charter of the United Nations, the rules of international law, the Security Council, where Russia, by the way, is presiding at the moment? So all of this seems quite strange to me, and I think that if we are set on maintaining the global security framework as it is, then action needs to be taken right now, right away, against Russia and its aggression.
Ms. Vasylenko, that's great. I mean, speaking of action, some of the responses from the Biden administration, Charles Michel, has come in. From your perspective, what do you make of this early reaction, which seemed to be a bit light on the sanctions? And then moving forward, you've already outlined some of your ideas. What do you think the immediate next step should be for Brussels and Washington?
So when we are talking and when you see all these messages on Twitter saying stand with Ukraine, support Ukraine, it's not just by words, although words are really important and declarations are really important, but actions are needed at the end of the day. These sanctions should have been introduced long ago, when there was just information about the threat of use of force. Threat of use of force is a violation of international law. It says so in Article 2.4 of the UN Charter. Again, nothing has been done. By now, if the sanctions were introduced, I believe that that would have been a deterrent already to Russia. But even if not, by now, there should have been contingents of NATO allied forces inside Ukraine, ready to go on the full defensive if there is a full offensive coming in from Russia.
Obviously, it's a very complicated situation in the way will support Ukraine. Secretary Stoltenberg has already said that there won't be any troops in there, and recently America has moved more troops to Poland. Is there any other way, whether it's on a financial side or more material things, that you'd be able to get immediately? Because it could be perceived by some that the installment of NATO troops on Ukraine feeds into, Russian propaganda and what President Putin said about, Russians and military equipment being crammed into Ukraine.
Immediate assistance to Ukraine is already coming in the form of defensive weapons. And when you spoke earlier about all the different weapons that we are getting inside Ukraine, yes, they are very progressive, but they are defensive weapons, and I must stress that. Even components for weapons which we could be getting and which are considered to be able to be used for potentially for the offensive, we are not getting those. They are not being sold to Ukraine. They are not being given to Ukraine. So again, it's important to stress that Ukraine as a country, we are fighting a defensive war. And everybody around us knows that and is only supporting our defensive actions. What we would need is to strengthen Ukraine's economy. And we would need money coming in already to bail out all the different enterprises, industries, and businesses which have suffered already, but more importantly, which will suffer as Ukraine will be pulling out of economic relations with Russia. So there are a lot of mistakes that have been made in the past, but by the Ukrainian government included. And here again, I'm being completely honest, the blame is on us partly. But at the moment, as things stand, we need to pull out from under Russia's economic influence completely. And to do that without harm to strategic industries, we would need the help from the West. Informational protection and defense would be another thing that we would need support on, as well as countering cyber attacks, so digital defense. That is also something that we would much rely on the assistance from the West.
Ms. Vasylenko, that's quite a laundry list of issues to deal with. It goes without saying, President Zelensky, speaking at Munich Security Conference, made a vague reference to the 5,000 elements that were contributed by Germany. And so I think the need for more intense weaponry will raise. Early last week, Poland, Ukraine, and the UK came up with a trilateral alliance. And I think, like you said about this decoupling on the trade issue, since 2014, Ukraine trade has gone down with Russia from 24% to 10%. So, I think also Russia will feel the pinch on it. Ms. Vasylenko, we have one question coming in right now for you, and the question is, what should we be watching out for Russia when it comes to the republics?
Could you say that again, because there was a breakup there for the first part?
Yeah, what are the next steps that we should be watching out for when it comes to Russia and the republics? Sort of the next steps, the next 48 hours or the next week. What do you expect to happen?
Oh, I see. Okay. So the worst case scenario is that, okay, these republics have been recognized by Russia, then a couple of other countries such as Syria, China, maybe India, and others who are dependent on Russia and on trade with Russia will also recognize these republics. Then, in order to protect these so-called republics, Russia will be moving further into Ukrainian territory. And now the question is also whether they recognize these republics within the borders of these so-called republics as they are at the moment, or whether they will recognize these republics as the whole of the Donetsk and Luhansk region, because that's a whole different matter. These regions are very big. It's like they compile the east of Ukraine. So if Russia recognizes that the borders of these so-called republics are now the whole of the Donetsk and Luhansk region in Ukraine, this means that they will be moving in on the offensive, attacking the parts of Ukraine which are now under the control of Ukraine, and that they will be invading further into the country, and with a goal to establish control there, and with a goal to increasing the territory which is under their direct control and authority. And that essentially is a declaration of war.
For everybody watching out there, I just want to go back that we're in the last part of this sort of expert reaction from Ms. Vasylenko, an MP of the Ukrainian Parliament. So if you have any final last questions, you can use Slido. Ms. Vasylenko, President Zelensky has been very steadfast in preaching calm, saying that, diplomatic missions shouldn't be evacuated. There have been some reports, on the BBC that there are contingency plans that if necessary, and if President Putin actually has, his sights on Kyiv, to moving the working government or to moving the government in exile to Lviv. Do you think those reports or that type of contingency planning is overblown? And does it even help that we're talking about this in the mainstream Western media?
I think that's not an option, not even for Putin. It would mean too much of an effort with too little of a result. It's not just about attacking and having troops move into the country. It's also about holding these territories. And that would be impossible with the level of unity that is now throughout the country, and the level of actually, I would say, complete unacceptance of anything Russian at all, from east to west, from south to north, throughout all of Ukraine. So that's an unrealistic scenario. I think that we will see developments in the east of Ukraine, maybe in the southern parts, in the Black Sea region also. But again, with the rest, I think Putin will not know what to do.
Well, Ms. Vasylenko, thank you so much for your insight. Obviously, as you said, it's great to hear that you think that's not an option and that it's an overblown concept that they would be moving the capital to Lviv in the west. A lot of the other cities you mentioned, whether it's Odessa and Mariupol, I think they might be getting into the, being the media attention a lot more given the strategic value of it. We're about to sign off here, Ms. Vasylenko. So before we thank you for your time, from GLOBSEC and everyone, do you have any final comments or any sort of piece of advice for everybody watching right now about either, what we should be on the lookout for, or again, how we can always support Ukraine, not just with words, but with actions?
The important thing for everyone to remember today is that we live in a world where wars are not what we have learned from history books. And the last wars that we in the North Atlantic and European region have experienced, essentially big wars, are the Second World War, about which people our age just read in history books again, as well as the Cold War. But this tension, as it's so often called in the media, in Ukraine is the largest amassing of troops since that very World War II. And today, the war is fought not just by tanks and guns. It's also a war in our minds, and a war over our minds and over our hearts. It takes the form of psychological attacks. It takes the form of informational attacks, cyber attacks, attacks on energy resources and the environment. And all these different dimensions call for society of today to be vigilant. In every sphere of our everyday life, we may be experiencing an attack of which we will not be even aware of at the point when it happens. So I guess my message to everyone would be to stay vigilant in order to stay safe, to analyze, check, double check, and triple check the information which they are getting through all the different media resources which are now widely available, and to stay together, to stay united. And only with these common efforts can we heal the world together, as you have in the background during all of our meeting. I've been looking at that side, and I think it's absolutely on point and absolutely the correct message to be sending out people today.
Well, Ms. Vasylenko, on behalf of everybody at GLOBSEC, I mean, we're not going to be the one part. You're not going to be, the one making the solution, but we'll always be looking to play our role in, helping to support allies in Western democracies through very tough times. For everybody out there, I just wanted to sort of reiterate the very powerful, lasting message from Ms. Vasylenko that sort of, Ukraine is under a full spectrum of attacks, and it's not just on them to do this on our own, that we all have skin in the game. We all have a vested interest in helping them get out of this. So for everybody watching, thank you so much for joining the first episode of GLOBSEC Tremor. Unfortunately, due to the situation in Ukraine, this probably won't be the first or the last episode of this. So I encourage everybody to sort of, look at the interview again and to follow Ms. Vasylenko on Twitter. It's a great insight. So Ms. Vasylenko, I'll be talking to you a little bit later for our next program. So have a great day. And of course, Slava.
Thank you. Thank you. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Goodbye.